Hello. Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our high-level panel session that's hosted by the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And we're looking at the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration and alignment and opportunities to support Europe's restoration ambition. So welcome to the morning session. And we are organizing this from UNEP-WCMC. We are a partner agency with the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So we'll be talking about a little bit about what that means as part of this panel. And with us, we have quite a very diverse panel that comprises of various organizations and members and people from the various task forces under the UN Decade. So just for everyone to know, and we'll get into it in a bit, but the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration is this global rallying call for revival and protection of ecosystems, and it looks at looking at it from both benefits to people as well as with nature. So it kind of aligns the ecocentric and anthropocentric angles to restoration quite well. And it runs from 2021 to 2030. So I'll just introduce the panelists that we have with me, and I will be moderating this session. So my name is Anushree Bhattacharjee. I work with the Nature Restored team at UNEP-WCMC. We are a collaboration between UN Environment Programme and WCMC, which is a UK-based charity. We are based in Cambridge in the UK. And co-moderating with me, we'll have my colleague, Giacomo Ascenzi, and he's with the Nature Economy team at UNEP-WCMC as well. We have Ms. Zhou Sheng. She is with FAO, and she's representing the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration lead agency from FAO. For those of you who might be aware, the lead agencies are UNEP and FAO. We have with us from the DG Environment, European Commission, Dr. Florian Claeys. We have, as you might be aware, and we'll talk about it a little bit more, there are 5 task forces under the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. There's one on best practices, one on finance, one on monitoring, one on youth, and one on science. And we are quite privileged to have people from World Bank. So we have Mr. Fiseha Abisa. He's with the World Bank, and he'll also be talking about finance task force work that World Bank is the lead for. And we have with us Ms. Andrea Montoa, and she is with FAO as well, and she's coordinating the UN Decade Best Practices Task Force. With that, I'll kind of call our session to order and maybe start off with Ms. Zhou. I think just to kind of give a little bit of a perspective on FAO is one of the UN Decade lead agencies. You're also the custodian agency for the Global Biodiversity Framework Target 2, which has to do with restoration. So maybe if you could share with the audience a little bit about these 2 international commitments and just give a bit of an overview to just kick us off.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Anushree. Thank you, everyone, for being with us here and following us online. So I'm very glad to be the first presenter to open the session. There is an urgent need to revive damaged ecosystems. Globally, the estimation of degraded land varies from less than 1 billion hectares to over 6 billion hectares. On top of that, over 60% of major marine ecosystems are estimated to be either degraded or unsustainably used. To support and scale up efforts to prevent, halt, and reverse degradation of ecosystems globally, in 2019, the UN General Assembly proclaimed the decade of 2021 to 2030 the Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, co-led by FAO and UNEP. The aim of the decade is to create a strong global movement to accelerate ecosystem restoration and to ensure a sustainable future. 2 years after the commencement of the decade, parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity adopted the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework in December 2022. Target 2 of the framework aims to ensure at least 30% of degraded ecosystems under effective restoration by 2030. Compared to the previous Aichi Biodiversity Target 15 to restore at least 15% of degraded ecosystems, Target 2 of the new framework has doubled the ambition and calls for stronger commitments and actions. One of the most well-known global multi-actor initiatives, the Born Challenge, launched in 2011, it aims to bring 150 million hectares of degraded and deforested landscape into restoration by 2020. The goal has been extended by 200 million hectares in 2014 by the New York Declaration on Forests. Now to restore 350 million hectares by 2030. And in addition to the global initiative, there are many ongoing regional initiatives. For example, the AFR 100 is a country-led effort to restore, to bring 100 million hectares of degraded and deforested land in Africa into restoration by 2030. The initiative 2020 is the equivalent in Latin America and Caribbean to restore 20 million hectares by 2020. In Europe, Caucasus, and Central Asia, the ECCA 30 is an initiative that seeks to restore 30 million hectares by 2030. And in Southeast Asia, the Asian Green Initiative endeavors to plant at least 10 million native trees in its 10 member states in 10 years. And we all heard from Florian that the European Nature Restoration Law sets a target to restore 20% of EU's land and sea areas by 2030 and all ecosystems in need of restoration by 2050. And what about countries? So countries are now in the process of updating their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, incorporating their national restoration targets. As FAO, we are the custodian of Target 2 and its headline indicator area under restoration. FAO is leading effort to support transparent monitoring and reporting of global progress on ecosystem restoration. I will speak more later and in the afternoon. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much for that, really broad and very deep dive overview as well. I was wondering, because like you mentioned, FAO is the custodian for Target 2. Could you tell us a little bit? I know we are aware that you're coming up with a methodology for area-based estimates for restoration and also developing a resource guide as well. So if you could maybe share with the audience a little bit about these kind of outputs that FAO has already come up with.
Thank you. To support the monitoring and reporting of Target 2, a working group was created in 2022 composed of experts from FAO, CBD, UNEP-WCMC, IUCN, the Society of Ecological Restoration, and so on, to develop monitoring guidance, which later became the indicator metadata. The indicator metadata has undergone several rounds of consultation, incorporating key inputs from the ad hoc technical expert group on disaggregation and on the ecosystem typology and so on. In 2023, the working group mobilized into a partnership to support implementation and monitoring of ecosystem restoration with a broadened membership, adding UNEP, UNDP, WRI, the C4 craft restore the world WWF and among others. The partnership was launched in Rome, FAO headquarters, in a workshop developing a roadmap for Target 2 to COP16 and beyond. More than 100 participants came together and engaged in discussions on the wide range of topics, including the alignment between the UN decade and the GBF, unpacking Target 2, transparent monitoring, large-scale restoration commitments, stakeholder engagement, capacity needs, and finance. The information on the workshop, including presentations and recordings, are available online. So the resource guide is a tool that is under development by authors from Society of Ecological Restoration, CBD, C4 ICRAF, and FAO from the partnership. It is a tool to help countries and partners to translate their restoration commitments into restoration plans and operationalizing restoration at scales called for by the target. It consulted various existing guidance, including COP13 decisions and the STAPER short-term action plan on restoration, on ecosystem restoration. The resource guide also incorporated materials generated from the Rome workshop and include case studies to help countries and to help illustrate key points. It offers various resources, guidelines, and tools for planning, implementing, and monitoring restoration. In the chapter on monitoring and reporting, the framework for ecosystem restoration monitoring, the FIRM, is highlighted. In the afternoon, in Manning room, there will be more presentations on the FIRM. You are more than welcome to join us to learn more about the FIRM. And the first draft of the guide was launched in CBD Substa 26 earlier this year. Followed by a round of a review through CBD's official channel. More than 300 comments from CBD parties and observers were received and subsequently incorporated into the guide. The resource guide will be officially launched on the Restoration Day in Cali, Colombia, COP16. And we're also developing e-learning based on the resource guide and a country self-assessment tool. Both will be launched in COP16. After the COP, there will be more opportunities on capacity building, including a project that is being designed by CBD and FAO to accelerate innovative monitoring for nature. Please, again, join us in COP16 Restoration Day. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And if there are any questions for Gio, we'll be taking it right at the end. We've kind of kept enough time at the end for a consolidated Q&A where you can kind of direct questions to particular panelists. So with that, if that's okay, we'll kind of move to Florian. And I think you mentioned in the plenary as well, and it was really great. I mean, we are celebrating the EU Nature Restoration Law coming into effect as of 18th August. And like you said, the timing of SERI is just perfect in that sense. And as one of the driving forces behind the EU Nature Restoration Law, it would be great if you could share with us a bit of an overview of what it means, especially in achieving Europe's restoration ambition, but also what are the next steps that the member states need to know in terms of meeting their nature restoration plans in the coming years.
Thanks a lot, and good morning, everyone. It's happy again to see you. So I will try to avoid any duplication with the slide set I've presented yesterday. So I don't have any slides today, but I just have one website to show you. As beginning of August, the EU has also made its reporting to the CBD, so as part of the commitment made following the COP16, following the GBF agreement. So it's a kind of self-assessment on how the EU is considering its alignment with the various targets and goals of the GBF. So this reporting is an online tool that is available on the website. So you just have to click slower, because I would like to present a bit the content. So you just have to click when you're looking on the website. So you can select the EU, then the target 2, and so there is some basic figures. So the 20% from the nature restoration law that I've explained yesterday. But it's also highlighting a bit more all the main legislation in place. So not only the nature restoration law, but also the other elements from the environmental legislation. So you can see that the European ambitions in terms of restorations are not only conveyed by the nature restoration law, but are also already present in the various directives, be it the Habitats Directive, the Post Directive, the Water Framework Directive, and the MSFT. So that's the 4 directives that I've a bit explained yesterday, on which the nature restoration law is building on. There is also some other tools, and you can see them a bit in the bottom of the screens. So the environmental liability tool, which requires to some private entities, or well, entities, I would say, to take the necessary measures, including restoring when they are causing some environmental damage. There is also the Common Agricultural Policy, and I said yesterday that there have been some link between the nature restoration law and this policy. Well, there is also some elements related to restoration that can be highlighted as part of the green architecture of the CAP. Same for the common fisheries policies on marine ecosystems. Yesterday I explained also a bit that there was synergies with the climate legislations. That's a concrete example with the revised regulation on the land use change and forestry, where as of 2026, member states will have to highlight not only highlight but monitor with some sophisticated modeling, so what we call the Tier 3 IPCC methodologies, the emissions and removals from various categories of land, including the land under restoration. At that moment, the nature restoration law was not yet even published, but there were a full list of the provisions that I've explained here, which correspond to several areas in Europe, and member states will have to discriminate a bit these areas and be able to report the emissions and removals associated to these ones. Could you go a bit slower? Below, sorry, thanks. There is also two legislations that are under negotiations for the moment. One is about the soil, and there will be some links that will be established between this soil monitoring law and the nature restoration law, and same with the forest monitoring law. More generally, and I said yesterday that the biodiversity strategy for 2030 is a bit the flagship document that is highlighting a bit more all the actions that the EU will take on restorations. So that's a bit under this consideration of other policy instruments. So please scroll down. You will see that there is various actions of the biodiversity. Oh, sorry, would you mind to scroll down a bit? Yeah, perfect. So related to the various targets, various actions of the CBD, so it's quite comprehensive. You can continue to scroll down. You'll see that there is a lot of explanations that are highlighted. So there is some elements on the plans, on the strategy for forest strategy, on the soil strategy. There is some explanation on the alignment. So you can see that based on all the work that we have done, we're considering that there is a high degree of alignment between what the EU is doing and the GBF target. And when you're getting a bit more down also, scroll down, so that's a bit more on the indicators. But there is also some aspects related to the measures on how to support these elements. It is not reflected in this webpage, but you can see that there is some target 19, target 20, which is a bit more funding biodiversity. And you will have a lot of details on these ones. But perhaps we can discuss this a bit later. For member states, so the next steps, most of these next steps are explained in the nature restoration law. That's the preparation of the national restoration plans. But there is also several deliverables that are committing the Commission in terms of guidance. The first one will be guidance on the high diversity landscape features. It is by the 18th of September that we have to deliver this piece of work. Then there will be also various guidance that will be delivered in the near future, including on how to set satisfactory levels. Because yesterday I told you that most of the objectives, several restoration objectives, are to have increasing trends until satisfactory levels are reached. And it will be member states that will have to set their own satisfactory levels. But by doing so, they will have to follow some guidance provided by the commissions. This guidance will be published by 2028. That means that in the first national restoration plans, they won't be available yet. If member states have already some ideas, of course, they can highlight that in the national restoration plans. But it's rather when the national restoration plan will be revised that this guidance will be effective. So that's with all the work that we will do. Of course, with member states, there will be some dialogue that will be established. So we are in the process to create all this comitology, how to gather also the right expert groups from the existing, because there is already a lot of existing skills and existing experience and expertise that we are mobilizing, especially under the EU Biodiversity platform. So there will be also some move on this regard.
Thank you so much. That's quite a lot to look forward to in the coming year. And I think just a follow-up would be, how do you see the regional law, which is EU nature restoration law, kind of translating across to the international commitments like Global Biodiversity Framework, Target 2 in particular, but also how would that be financed in Europe? So how would the scaling up of restoration happen?
Yep. So for the translation of the nature restoration law up to the GBF, so that's exactly this document that explaining a bit more how all the pieces of legislations on restoration in the EU are organizing one with another, and especially the nature restoration law, to contribute to this target and ensure a high level of agreement. In terms of finance, and you will find much more information on the target 19 and target 20, there is more or less 3 big information for you to keep. Following the GBF, so there have been some commitment made by the EU to increase its domestic finance on biodiversity. So that's one figure, the 2 figures that I've highlighted yesterday in terms of earmarking of the MFF, of the multi-year financial framework. Donc 7.5% of the EU budget should go to biodiversity in 2024. And in 2026, 2027, it has to be up to 10%. For the moment, we are not ready to discuss the period after 2027, because it will be the next multi-year financial framework, and the preparation of the next MFF will start next year. So for the moment, I cannot say more on this aspect. The second part is how the EU has also committed to double its financing at the international level. So from 3.5 billion of euros to 7 billion of euros by 2026, 2027. There is various funding instruments for that. So the NDK, which is more with the cooperation with countries, but there is also the instruments on the pre-accessions of countries. And there were a question yesterday about that. So the EU has also a dedicated funding to support the accession for the countries that are candidate for the accessions to the EU, also with some earmarking on climate and biodiversity. It's not clearly targeted to the nature restoration law, because when this fund has been negotiated, the nature restoration law was, of course, not yet entered into force. But at least with these flagships on climate and biodiversity, there is also some funds that are available on this art. Last but not least, there is also, and it's especially the target 19D, C and D, that there is an effort to ensure aligning of private finance and other funding with biodiversity, so a kind of mainstreaming. Several opportunities can be considered under this chapeau. First thing is with the climate instruments. So now, through the revision of the emission trade system, there is much more possibilities to fund biodiversity actions through the auctioning of the carbon quotas. There is also some elements related to the corporate sustainability reporting directive. So all the pieces around the sustainable finance, and there is a lot of things that are ongoing on this one. So I've mentioned the taxonomy yesterday, but there is plenty of other tools, including a standard of European green bonds that will also contribute to this aspect. There is also some dedicated funding for private or blended finance, when public guarantee can be brought to private actors to support them funding nature restoration. The big instrument on that is InvestEU, with various pillars. So there is a fund. There is also some advisory services, some forum also for private companies to be able to discuss one with another. More generally, we have also an European business and biodiversity platform, which is also a good forum where all private companies interested in funding biodiversity can discuss one with another. And last but not least, there have been also a pledge that have been made about 10 billion of euros dedicated to natural capital and circular economy, which is vehiculated mainly through the European Investment Bank. So that's a bit all the various opportunities. You will have all the details in the similar page, but for target 19 and target 20.
Thank you so much. And just a quick reminder again, we'll be taking questions right at the end after we've kind of spoken to the panel. So if you have questions for Florian, please to hold them and we'll come back to you. I think with that, I'll kind of hand over the moderation to my colleague, Giacomo.
Thank you, Anushree. And yeah, nice to be having a chat with you. So UNEP-WCMC is a partner agent to the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So I wanted to ask you, what does it take for an organization to become a partner agent of the decade, and a little bit what that entails? Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. And I think just to kind of maybe give a bit of an overview of what it means to be a partner or agency to the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Just to recap, we have the lead agencies, which are UNEP and FAO. Then there are other supporting agencies, which are the 3 Rio conventions. So you have UNCCD, UNFCCC, and CBD, as well as other UN agencies, so UNDP, UNESCO, various others. Then there are these global partners. And these are large agencies which kind of function often as membership organizations, and they work at a global scale. So essentially, we are looking at organizations like WWF, IUCN, SER, which bring in their members into the UN Decade fold. And that's the global partner agencies. So the UN Decade decided to kind of cap it at 20 global partners and decided that would be revisited later. Then you have the supporting agencies. So these are, again, agencies that are working to support ecosystem restoration with various mandates. So they might be geographical focus, they might have particular inputs on various elements of restoration, and you have AFR 100, you have, again, ICLEI, you have Cambridge Conservation Initiative, you have multiple other conservation restoration organizations who are these supporting agencies, and there are quite a lot of them across the world. And then there are actors, and the actors are essentially individual entrepreneurs, NGOs, research institutions, academia, who are, again, working to support restoration on the ground. So a lot of that is happening across the world, again, and multiple organizations, including, I'm sure, several of you in the room and across SERI would be members. And then there are the funding agencies, and these are essentially the agencies that support and finance the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration through what Joe had mentioned very briefly, the multi-partner trust fund. So these would be governments, private sector who are funding UN Decade through UNEP and FAO. And then if we could have the slide up, there is a very simple procedure to actually just find out about how to become a partner entity of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So if we could have the slide up online as well. And that essentially has a website. I'm not sure if why it's not coming on the screen here. Yeah, perfect. So there is an email ID, that's the restorationDecade@un.org. This is manned by dedicated staff at the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So if an agency is interested in finding out how to become a partner and find out what kind of partnership they might be eligible for, the best way would be to actually just reach out to them directly, and you would have a dedicated member of the staff who would then be able to guide through the processes.
Great. And yeah, as Jua was mentioning as well, later there will be more sessions going over the UN Decade, in particular looking at the flagship initiative. So if you're interested in knowing more about inspiring examples of restoration on the ground, you can attend that session as well. And yeah, applications for being a partner are open as well. I want to ask you more about the work that UNEP-WCMC has been carrying or is currently involved with as being part of being a partner agency to the UN Decade, and maybe specifically also looking at the work that we've been doing related to restoration in Europe.
Lovely, thank you. And I think, yeah, as UNEP-WCMC, because we are a partner agency with the UN Decade, we've been quite heavily involved with the launch report of the UN Decade when the UN Decade was announced. So we were co-authors of the launch report. We've also contributed to the Global Indicators report that the UN Decade had published as well. And like Joe kind of did a shout out, we are part of the monitoring task force of the UN Decade. We are members of the best practices task force. We are members of the Science Task Force, and through that, we've been contributing to the various outputs that the UN Decade has been producing. Particularly, I think Gio and I have been kind of coordinating over the last year in making sure the firm framework that she mentioned, that would be the official framework and reporting mechanism to CBD Target 2, also the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So what we are trying to do is make it interoperable with other platforms that host restoration data. And UNEP-WCMC, with funding from the Dutch government, had actually come up with what we call the Nature Commitments Platform. And this was essentially to bring in any kind of efforts and commitments and pledges and other ambitions that restoration organizations, whether it's NGOs, whether it's individuals, have towards restoration. So anyone could kind of pledge to restore something and then report against it, and this was a global one. So we worked a lot to make it interoperable with firms. So I think that went live on the 21st of February, just in time for the International Day of Forests. And so we've been, and what it means in terms of interoperability is that we are sharing and exchanging data with the platform, and then firm is pulling data from nature commitments and vice versa. So we've been kind of learning through this process, feeding into this, and across Europe there are multiple restoration projects that we've been involved in. There was the Mercies project that looked at marine ecosystem restoration, and you would kind of, it was a large project that kind of looked at and had, I think, 29 partner organizations. And I think if you've attended some of the marine sessions, you'd have seen presentations from that, and posters are up there as well today. There was AfriMed, which was a follow-up to Mercies that looked at restoration of macroalgae, especially around the Mediterranean. Then there are other restoration projects that we've been involved in. One is funded by the Endangered Landscape and Seascapes program. So tomorrow in one of the sessions in the afternoon, we'll actually be talking more about this particular project. And that's really feeding off one of the papers that Jody had kind of published in 2021 that talked about the barriers to scaling up restoration in Europe, and talked about financing being a barrier, and talked about the lack of political priority, talked about stakeholder conflict. And essentially this project called Convening for Restoration is trying to bring together different stakeholders across Europe and kind of work through these co-creation model of solutions to unlocking finance for restoration, and we are focusing particularly on private sector finance. It's looking at stakeholder engagement and conflict management, and we are working with BirdLife and RSPB as part of that project. Of course, there are multiple other projects, and I think I'll just kind of mention some of them and you'll hear more about it. So feel free to reach out to Giacomo, me, other colleagues from UNEP-WCMC who are there. But we are part of Network Nature, and we are particularly kind of looking at the work package that's looking at the finance case for nature-based solutions with a deep dive in Europe. We are part of this Co-op for CBD project, which is looking at essentially understanding how the CBD GBF Target 2 can kind of translate across Europe and what that would mean for the member states. And I think I'll kind of pause there and hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Anushree. Yeah, absolutely. Like, feel free to reach out to any of us at UNEP-WCMC to know more about our involvement in Europe when it comes to restoration. And hopefully that gave you an overview of like the kind of work that potentially being a partner to the UN Decade could entail as well. I think I'm gonna move to Fiseha now. Thank you so much for being here, first of all. The World Bank has been an active supporter of ecosystem restoration projects globally, yeah, I wanted to, and it's also the chair of the UN Decade Task Force on Finance. So my first question is whether you could talk us through some of the concrete actions that the World Bank is taking in supporting ecosystem restoration in Europe, and how these actions are then feeding into the work of the task force. Thanks.
Thanks, and thanks so much, and good morning. And thank you for having me. Yeah, I think I want you to follow me a little bit because I'm going to talk about numbers because it's all about money, finance. So, do you mind to display? Okay, it's over there. Okay, good. Let me go to the next one. Can I move? Yes. So, just to make it a little bit practical, I will take you to our interventions in Ukraine, Moldova, Montenegro, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. I think those are the countries where we have now, currently we are just starting ecosystem restoration. I'm not going to talk about those projects which are completed, but those are just started last year, and some of them are going to be launched in the next couple of months. What are our interventions there? Just to see it. The level of intervention we have, can you go back to the, yes. I don't have that much, powerful side, so I have to follow you with my iPhone now. I'm good, thank you. So if you see the financial instrument, what kind of financial instruments we are using, especially for those of you who are on the research area, especially in financial management, financial engineering, economics, natural resource management, ecology, and so forth, this may be important what kind of financial instrument we have. One is we have this DPO, this is the Development Project Operational Finance. This is a kind of financial instrument to support countries' budgets. And it is a huge amount, of course. So far in those countries, a minimum of 150 million. So what we do there as DPO, as a financial instrument for ecosystem restoration, is the government committed itself to do some specific activities. And we don't manage the project ourselves. We don't really go to specifically to that kind of projects. But the project the government is undertaking is mainly policy-oriented. It is changing of behavior. So that is one area we have. The other one is the TEC, that is the technical assistance kind of financial instrument. The technical assistance is where the government is working specifically on a specific topic where we come in to provide technical assistance with financial support. The other, which maybe is very much interested to some of you in the research area, is the essay activities. This is analytical and advisory kind of financial instrument, focused very much on generating data, information on ecosystem. I will give you a specific example where we use this instrument, essay instrument, and provide it on generating data. And the last one that's very common nowadays is IPF. This is the investment project financing. This is actual physical investment that we are working on. Of course, most of this money is grant in some of those countries, and of course, and some is blended finance, grant plus concessional finance. I think the move and the future direction is more to concessional financing. Grant is just to kick off the process, to kick off the project, but may not be a sustainable way of financing ecosystem or nature restoration. And now, using this, the level of intervention will be one is changing behavior, policy, enabling environment for ecosystem restoration. Because for ecosystem restoration, you cannot go to the land and simply restore it. Or you can simply go and plant a tree, but that's quite unsustainable if it is not supported by policy, regulations. So the enabling environment should be there. The behavior should be changed. That's one focus that we are working on. The second is, as I said, through SA, through DPO, we also produce data, information. I think there's so many data and information being generated on nature ecosystem, and I'll provide some of them later. And of course, the physical investment, that's especially through IPF. The activities are quite common. I think it's quite common to FAO, UN, and the EC and others. What kind of activity we have is, one is, of course, that is forest or mainly reforestation. All our approach so far on nature restoration, ecosystem restoration is nature-based solution. So all is nature-based solution like reforestation, regeneration. We have also in some countries abandoned mining restoration, especially in Armenia. We have agroforestry activities and of course river bank restoration. This is mainly in Moldova, where we have restoration activities along the river of Dnestr River, almost 700 kilometers from north to south of the country. Going to the second part of the question, what is that contribution to the finance task force? One is on shifting the economics of restoration. I think on that part we have a long way to go. That is to make sure that this land restoration, nature restoration is contributing to the GDP of the country. What does that mean for the country? What the country benefits from restoration? What the private sector is benefiting from being involved in a restoration? I think that economics of restoration is something that those of you in the research should do more, but we are also generating a lot of data on that. The second one is, as I said, is fostering environment, enabling environment. I have already said something about it. And then, of course, the business case for investment. I think that is where I'm very much interested in, because look, there's money, grant money in EC, there is money from the World Bank, money from the UN, but those, and from the government too, but that's comparing to the amount of money needed for land restoration, nature restoration, those money is almost nothing. It will not do anything. The money there in the private sector hand. So we need to tap into the private sector pocket. And to do that, the business case should be well developed. What the benefit of the private sector will be by investing in land restoration? I think that's where we are working on. I think we have some business models that being developed, especially based in the Armenia and Moldova experience. In Moldova, the two largest wine industry are now involved in land restoration. I hope that will be a very good business case for the future. Mining industries are being involved in Armenia, and that will be also another business case. So we need to have a compelling business cases to attract the private sector. Now, just one specific example from Armenia, if you go to the next slide. And this is on data on how the economics of restoration is extremely important. If you see now, this is, I think, for those who are in RM area, in economics and in financial restoration, the cost of inaction is something that we always calculate. For example, this is a data from Armenia, and this report is going to be released in the next 1 or 2 months. The information, I mean, the paper is already completed. We are working on formatting, design, and others. And the analysis said that based on the baseline is 2023 last year, if Armenia doesn't do anything in 2063, it costs us 260 million. But if the country doesn't do anything, if there is inaction, if no restoration is done, this 260 million will go up to 536 million. Now, Armenia, the restoration or land degradation in Armenia is costing the country 1.3 of its GDP. But in 2050, it will cost the country 2.75 GDP. That is around 536 million, which is a lot of the country's money will go to it is inaction. I think that's what the government can be convinced. I mean, you can't really preach the government, tell the government with numbers, with figures, and they can easily take it. This is a lot of money. This is the country's economy. If you don't do anything on land restoration, this will cost you your 2.75 GDP. But that is for just Armenia. And we have a similar study in the West European countries, and the cost of inaction is even much higher. I think the benefit ratio for each $1 investment, the very common data is $7. If you invest $1 in land restoration or ecosystem restoration, the return is $7. But most of that data is from biodiversity. But we have one specific case, we have done it in Armenia, it will be $4. And it's a very conservative estimation. So if you invest $1, your return is $4 in a very extreme conservative estimate. I think for those of you who are interested, we can share with the data and we can go to the very detail how that was done. We have used a lot of different models. I think the figure that over there can also provide you some insight. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Viseha. Definitely really useful to look at a case study from Armenia that just kind of emphasizes the need to do more work on developing the economics of restoration and also mentioning some of the finance instruments such as blended finance that are also mentioned in Target 19 of the Global Biodiversity Finance and that potential to tap into private capital as well. But yeah, the second question is related to some of the key takeaways from the work that the World Bank has been doing in Europe, in addition to what you've already shared. Yeah, if you'd like to share with the audience some takeaways for both practitioners and financiers on supporting restoration work in Europe.
Oh, thanks. I think if you go to the next slide, that might give you some idea on that. I think the first thing is on the private sector capital. But before that, I think even the economics of restoration. The economics of restoration, I think it needs more research, and that research should be also shared with the broader or the public domain. It should be in the public domain. It should be shared to the broader community. That I think everyone in the research area is really need to work on that one. The second is on the private sector. On the private sector, I think that money is not yet tapped. And the private sector is not that much interested. I think the question is why the private sector is not interested in it. Because ecosystem restoration is very costly. It is very expensive exercise. And second, it's very risky. Because you may not get your money right away, it takes time. So it has a risk, the risk level is high. And second is it is costly. And the second is because you don't get your money right away, it takes time. So I think that we need to have the business case for the private sector will be developed. I think that's another case. Not only private sector, by the way, even for the government. One of the challenge when I talk to the government, and on Monday I have also a meeting with the Minister of Environment and Ecology in Moldova. I know his first question, because he already posted his question, he sent me an email. And the first question for him is why the government of Moldova should spend money on land storage. Why? Because for him, nature restoration is a global public good. And for the global public good, the international organization, should take the responsibility, which is, I mean, everyone is part and member and the citizen of the global, every one of us are global citizens, so everyone should contribute. So the business case for the government as well as the private sector is highly needed. And another very important thing I want to make it is on the commercial models. These business models that are coming up, like the private equity, like the green bond, like the biodiversity credit, and the carbon credit, I think these kind of business models need to be further developed. And the more interesting nowadays is swap, debt for nature swap. That kind of financial instrument is now becoming more popular because governments are very much interested. But the question is, what does that mean? What is debt for nature work for private sector? How does that work for private sector? For the government, yes. But it is just starting and we need to do more work on that one.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I invite you all to check the resources that were published so far by the Task Force on Finance. There's a stocktake report on finance for restoration, and also document that outlines blueprints for investment in ecosystem restoration globally. But yeah, thanks, Viseha. I'll move now to Andrea. Hi, Andrea. Thank you for being here. And yeah, you're as Anushree mentioned, you're the coordinator of the UN Decade Task Force on Best Practices. So yeah, just as a first question, would you like to talk us through some of the outputs of the task force and some of the key insights that you would like to share with the audience?
Yes, good morning. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for the question. So, well, the UN Decade Task Force on Best Practices, just as a quick introduction, is led by FAO, but it's really a collaborative effort of 400 members and 180 organizations. And the mission of the mandate of the task force is to support and develop guidance, capacity development, and knowledge dissemination for ecosystem restoration, and in that way support the implementation of the UN Decade. So the task force was established in 2020, and since then, 3 main outputs have been delivered, and derived activities are being implemented. So I will provide a quick overview to respond to this question. And I think now it's visible. So the first output is related to the principles, the development of principles and the standards of practice for ecosystem restoration. So in the first one is in 2021, the development of the principles to respond to this need to create a shared vision of ecosystem restoration for the decade. So this is a publication available online, translated in several languages, that, I invite you to consult, and includes 10 principles. And then, and this, important to mention, this was done in partnership with the Society for Ecological Restoration and the Commission on Ecosystem Management of IUCN, and in very close collaboration with WWF, C4ICRAF, EcoHealth Network, and the restoration community, because the principles were subject to a global consultation and several targeted consultations. Then, as a subsequent effort to provide detailed guidance on how to implement or how to apply these principles in restoration projects. In 2022, the task force, following the same partnership but involving more organizations and partners, started with the development of standards of practice for ecosystem restoration. Launched last year at the SCR International Conference in Darwin, and recently published online as well, available in English, soon in Spanish and French. And these are standards, voluntary standards, that provide recommendations, more than 300 recommendations on how to apply the principles throughout the whole restoration process. The second output is the global capacity knowledge and learning action plan. This is a plan that builds on the results of a global capacity needs assessment conducted in 2021. It was an online survey translated in 7 languages, for which we collected more than 1,300 responses that help us identify the key gaps in terms of capacities from different stakeholder groups, and that was the basis then for developing this action plan. This action plan proposes 8 capacity development initiatives tailored then to different stakeholder groups. The task force is currently developing partnerships, because we have a big number of members, but now we are creating sub-task forces to support each of the capacity development initiatives. For the moment, the first 6 initiatives are under implementation. We started this year, and it will be all the plan will be implemented throughout the remaining time of the decade. And the final, but last but not least, the final output is a framework for dissemination, capitalization, and documentation of good practices. For this output, we have been collaborating very closely with the monitoring task force, as my colleague Juo mentioned, and we integrated functionalities to document and disseminate and capitalize good practices into the framework for ecosystem restoration monitoring, that are also already operational. So there is one functionality that allows for the documentation of good practices derived from the restoration initiatives registered on the firm, and another functionality that allows for the visualization of the practices documented, but also capitalizes on the practices that have been already collected by other collaborating platforms of the UN Decade, of the partners of the UN Decade, such as WOCAT, Panorama Solutions, GoPro4. So right now that functionality offers more access, free access, no need for registration even, of more than 1,500 good practices relevant for ecosystem restoration that are classified in different filters, and we will provide more details in the session of the afternoon about these outputs if you are interested. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. And yeah, very nice to hear that in addition to the principles and standards of practice to guide ecosystem restoration, which in a previous session yesterday was mentioned as an absolute must read for ecosystem restoration practitioners, the task force has also been working on action plans and the framework for dissemination of good practices as well. But yeah, given that the theme of the conference is to bridge science, policy, and practice, I wanted to ask you, how can different stakeholders engage with the materials produced by the task force? And yeah, maybe if you could provide an example of how these guidelines and outputs are being integrated into ecosystem restoration projects, that would be great.
Sure. Well, first, maybe you can go to the previous one just for a second. Just to mention that, to reiterate that all these publications are freely accessible, available online, and that's for the case of the publications, and for the case of the platform, as I mentioned, the platform, the firm is available and also freely accessible to document or consult good practices. So that's for let's say broad engagement with these outputs. Then if you move to the second slide, please. Then for a specific example on how some of them can be integrated in restoration projects. So well, the first one I would like to refer to the standards of practice, because as I mentioned, because of their nature, they were designed to support projects, restoration projects, to maximize their benefits, their restoration outcomes for nature and people. So this document provides more than 300 recommended practices. Through also was subject to a global consultation. We have 33 authors, 25 organizations involved. And of course, it's a very comprehensive document, but now the challenge and what we are working on is on developing strategies to support adoption, and to help assist projects with integration of these recommendations or of these standards. So to that end, the task force is working on developing a tool, a decision-making tool, and an e-learning course that will be hopefully available next year to then support specifically projects with their adoption. And I also want to mention very briefly this is an overview of how the common search engine of good practices look like on FIRM. So, well, you see that that's also a very helpful tool for projects when getting inspiration of what is already being done, because the rationale behind this effort is to allow knowledge and enable knowledge dissemination and capacity development ultimately. So projects can access these to then learn, and also when developing strategies, when maybe having some decision-making processes, maybe all of these efforts, this capitalization, global capitalization of knowledge can help and support projects specifically from the side of from the perspective of consulting these materials or these good practices, but also to enhance the visibility by documenting their good practices here. So also we have some projects already. We are fostering and supporting projects to that end.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andrea. And I'll pass it to Anushree maybe to launch the Q&A session. Thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you so much, Giacomo, and thank you for your patience, and thanks to all the panelists. So we'll now open up for the Q&A session. We have volunteers in the audience, so maybe just raise your hand and we'll come to you. And if you could just maybe identify yourself by the name, organization, and who among the panelists you would like to address your question to. So we'll kind of look to the audience if you have any questions. Yes.
Good morning. Thanks for the panel. Paul Brotherton from Wetlands International Europe. A question for Florian and anyone else. I was curious about the relationship between NB SLAPs and nature restoration plans. To what extent are these the same things? To what extent are they different? And does the Commission have a role in the NB SLAPs like they do for the nature restoration plans? Thanks.
Should we take questions? Okay. It's yet to be discussed with member states on how this precise articulation could be considered. For the moment, the national restoration plans are only framed with the nature restoration law, but there is one of the objectives which is indeed to support member states and the EU in meeting the international agreement. So there will be some links between the national restoration plans and the NBSAPs, or at least member states are encouraged to establish these links. As well as the NBSAPs, so the first step was indeed to do this report for this self-reporting on alignment, to see how the EU and the various pieces of legislations were ensuring the alignment with the GBF targets. Now there will be some discussions also with member states on how the Commission can support them in drafting their own NBSAPs.
Thanks, Florian. Any other questions from the audience?
Thank you very much. I would like to ask Florian again. how do you see the links between the MSFD and the Natural Restoration Law, the measures for the MSFD and the National Restoration Actions, and your views on what happens if you fail these deadlines or these binding targets? Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, so the MSFD, so this Marine Strategy Framework Directive, already includes various provisions pushing member states to ensure good environmental status on their marine habitats. The link with the NRL is that it's the same habitats that are targeted by the MSFD and the National Restoration Law. The National Restoration Law, a bit the same way that it is introducing some time-bound restoration targets to the Habitats Directive, the BED Directive, is doing a bit the same thing on the habitats of the marine habitats compared to the MSFD. Then regarding also the MSFD, so there is a dedicated article in the National Restoration Law about the cooperation on environmental measures, which is also introducing some provisions on how the member states have to ensure cooperation among themselves, also in relation with the common fisheries policies in a timely manner, which should help them to be able to reach the targets in a timely manner. So that's a bit the reply that we'll give you, that we have introduced in the National Law some instruments that should facilitate member states in reaching their marine targets. If they fail on that, in this case, there is various provisions also in relation with the monitoring. At the moment, if in the monitoring there is, if the monitoring is showing that the measures, including in the national restoration plans, are not enough to reach the targets, in this case, there is an arrangement that has to be made by the national restoration plans, which has to be revised. So there is a kind of obligation of revisions of the national restoration plans if there is some good proof that it's not yet fit for purpose. So that's a bit the link that has been made in the natural restoration law. And after, it's part of all the dialogue between the Commission and the member states on how to support member states if it appears that there is some difficulty for some member states to reach the targets.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Thanks for the presentations and all the effort that you are developing. I'm Jordi Cortina from the University of Alicante and SER Europe. You've shown so many initiatives to promote restoration in Europe and globally, and also these tools to ensure the quality. My question is, how are you planning to link both to ensure the quality of all these interventions in Europe and globally?
Do you want to take this? Maybe I can kind of come in with, with the global ones, and I think Gio can talk about it a little bit more and in the afternoon sessions as well. There is the framework, framework for ecosystem restoration monitoring, which, like we had mentioned, would be the official reporting mechanism under GBF Target 2. It is the official mechanism of reporting towards the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And what FAO and UNEP and other partner agencies have been doing is try to make it interoperable, try to link it up with other regional country-level efforts. I think Andrea mentioned it in her presentation. So they're looking to get in best practices from across the world, including Europe. And it's probably like a call to everyone to just explore the firm, and make sure that your restoration projects, even if it's at a site level, are reflected in there. Because the ultimate aim is that essentially with firm being able to report data that can only be validated by governments. So at a point, we want to get to that point where FAO and UNEP and the UN Decade can essentially reach out to the governments across EU member states and be like, you are reporting X number of hectares of restoration. These are generally government or public projects, but from your countries, we have seen in the firm registry, there are many more restoration projects that are linked up. And it's kind of like that push and making sure that the reporting is not just top down, but it's more inclusive. And I think just to give a shout out to another project that I'd been part of, that IUCN under Bond Challenge was doing, we worked a lot with the government of India. This was probably back in 2017, to make sure that the Bond Challenge Country Progress Report that the government of India was producing was just not data from the government of India, but was actually data from all of India. So it included data from private sector, funded restoration projects, from NGOs, from other restoration practitioners, and it was almost the first of its kind. And I think the idea is that FIRM and other platforms would essentially feed into it and build on that, and that would ensure that this feeding from site level to national level to subnational, regional, right up to the global reporting happens. And that's where this interoperability bit that I think Gio can talk to more would be about. And I'll kind of hand over to her for a little bit more.
Thank you. Actually, I wanted to add that one objective of the framework for ecosystem restoration monitoring the firm is to reduce the reporting burden. So these commitments, like when they build, develop capacities in countries, normally they have different focal points. So the firm is trying to connect these to foster collaboration between the platforms, between the conventions and frameworks, and to streamline the reporting. So FIRM is doing a data compilation work and share that with countries as a start to share, report area-based estimates. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, thank you for this interesting and insightful panel. I'm Sara Liacar from Rewilding, Portugal, and my question goes also in the direction of getting deeper in how to ensure that the UN Decade and the Nature Restoration Law are implemented with quality. Just wanted to pick on the example of forests, because both Zuo in her presentation today and Florian in the plenary session yesterday mentioned, for example, targets of tree planting. And what we are already seeing is that despite science tells us that tree planting should be used in specific places and is not just the best method or most efficient to do everywhere, as in many places, just better the ecological succession and restoration. What we see is like tree planting is being promoted in habitats where we shouldn't have trees, or even creating very simplified and non-functional forests. And then my question was, what are the mechanisms that the partners of the UN Decade and the different task forces you are working for are putting in place to ensure that what is implemented in the ground is actually meaningful and useful for the targets we have? Thank you.
Okay, so I can start, and the other panelists could complement. So the Article 13 of the Nature Restoration Law, which is reflecting this commitment made under the Biodiversity strategy of planting 3 billion additional trees, and include also some provisions pushing member states to ensure that such tree planting has to be made in a right way, in full respect of ecological principles. Some guidance has been published by the Commission as part of the Biodiversity strategy and the forest strategy on how to ensure that. The idea also with these 3 billion additional trees is not like an additional restoration targets by itself. It's also through the restoration measures for the other articles that this contribution to the 3 billion additional trees has to be made. Meaning that it could be trees in cities, it could be trees in high diversity landscape features that can be counted. It will not be just mere afforestation, or especially monoculture, for example, that could be extremely devastating in terms of biodiversity impacts. Such tree planting, for sure, will not be able to be counted as part of these contributions to the 3 billion additional trees. Yeah, probably. perhaps last thing, more generally, there is also in the national restoration plan an obligation for member states to anticipate the assessment of the effectiveness of the restoration measures, which is a way also to capture the fact that these restoration measures have to be effective, but also of good quality. So that's also a bit in the hand of the member states on how to ensure that that they are putting the right restoration measures at the right place at the right moment, and they have to report this information even in the national restoration plans and then in the reporting obligations.
Thank you, Florian. I wanted to add that the target of bring at least 30% degraded ecosystem under restoration, the objective is to complete it, to restore all the ecosystem by 2030. The objective is to make sure that effective restoration actions are initiated. And for that, we need to plan, make assessment, and to adaptive monitor the restoration projects. I know plenty of tools that will, for tree planting, for example, I know plenty of tools that will suggest, based on your location and the conditions, it will suggest native species and suitable species. And there are platforms. So for example, the Fern platform, you can consult good practices related to a specific action, type of intervention, and where it can be applicable. And then the standard of practices, which is the knowledge product Andrea was explaining. There are numbers of principles and standards related to the planning and assessment stage to make sure that we're not doing the wrong intervention when we start a project. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for those very important questions. And basically, I wanted to add on this question and the question from Jordi. So one of the main objectives of developing these standards of practice was to address exactly that, no? To help develop restoration outcomes of high quality that maximize basically benefits for nature and people. These standards of practice they built on existing standards. I mean, the first step to develop these standards was to conduct a stock taking of existing standards from different approaches. So one of them, like a restoration of forests and landscapes. So they already include this, but these standards are at a very global level. So what I wanted just to say is that we have also been discussing within the task force after publishing these standards, after having the nature restoration law just published and other instruments, how besides this tool and besides the e-learning course that is being developed, how we can also influence further these processes. So how we can integrate these standards even when they are at global level, but they can also influence local ecosystem-specific standards, regional standards. I know that also for Europe there are some efforts ongoing also to that end, and how they can be integrated into that, and how they can even be integrated into the. I mean, they can be used by donors when developing calls for projects, for funding, how also that could be integrated as part of the selection process. So there is nothing, let's say, concrete that I can tell in this moment, but I just want to share that we have been discussing within the task force, like how we can, as the set of measures to support the adoption of the standards, how we can also influence these processes. And this is something I think is in our list, on our to-do list, on really work on concrete measures to do that. But that's been let's say intensively discussed right now with the members and the partners and the UNEP partners. Thank you.
Thanks. I think sustainability is really major issue, because especially I think when it comes to afforestation and reforestation. It's good that everywhere you can see it, but is this going to be sustainable? That's the big question. One, every initiative of nature restoration should be supported by policy. There should be a long-term policy that goes beyond 4-year term of political office term, that we have to have that long-term policy. Second, there should be broader stakeholder engagement when we design whatever the nature restoration activity is, that the private sector, the government, the civil society, the academia, and the community should be involved in the process. And third is benefit. There should be benefit for everyone. Now, what is the benefit of that reforestation activity or wetland restoration for the community? The community should get something out of that restoration. And then the same is true for the private sector, should have a return on it. So I think that benefit should be articulated. And of course, the benefits should be there. And nature restoration, ecosystem restoration provides that kind of benefit to everybody. I think that should be. And the fourth one is the one that I mentioned earlier, the economics of restoration should be well articulated. It's not for community or private sector or to the specific government. The benefit of the economy of restoration is for the whole nation, for the whole country. It increases. If you restore wetland, if you restore degraded land for agriculture, it benefits and increases the GDP of the country. I think that makes it more sustainable. And finally, the global public good. Nature restoration, ecosystem restoration is quite necessary for climate benefits. And it is also benefit for the global ecosystem. Let us take the bird migration flyways. If you see, for example, Moldova is a bird spot for migratory bird. For those birds which migrate somewhere to Africa. So if the bird is coming from Africa or Asia, South Asia, if you don't have the wetland, or if you don't have the ecosystem for the migratory bird to stay, then that bird will not be in Moldova. And you are losing that migratory bird flyways. And that will be a huge negative impact for the whole of the community, the global community. So I think we need to make sure that that kind of global public good is also properly articulated.
Thank you so much. And that was a brilliant question. You got all our panelists engaged.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the panel and the discussion. I'm George Gann. I'm the International Policy Lead for the Society for Ecological Restoration, and this is a little bit of a follow-up. So we've talked about quality, how do we ensure quality, and standards, and getting the good information out there so people make good decisions. But we've also heard about risk this morning, and we know risk from the tree planting business before, where scaling actually creates risk. So I asked the panel, what are the other risks other than projects fail, plants don't grow, animals don't live, or collateral damage from things like tree planting and grasslands? What are the other major risks, and how can the members of SER Europe help to mitigate those risks to lower the risk so that we can have higher success? Thank you.
Let me start. Well, as it's very, very natural for me to begin with financial risk. So yes, the financial risk is very huge. I mean, if you invest somewhere, if you don't get the return, the financial risk is very obvious. But the problem is the financial risk is not a short-term risk. It has a long-term risk. One, if you lose your money, the government will not have any appetite next time to work with you. The private sector will not have any appetite to work with you. That financial risk is very obvious. The other is the ecosystem or the biological risk. I mean, some people might think that for reforestation or afforestation, maybe especially afforestation, well, there is no any problem because this is tree, you have green. But no, it has negative impact in our ecosystem if it's not properly designed, if you don't have the right space and if you don't do it at the right time, at the right place. So I think that kind of negative impact, whereas we need the academia, the experts to come in and help us properly where to do, what to do. So I think that ecosystem risk is, and the third is some species and some wrong way of doing restoration may have some biological risks, especially disease or something. I mean, especially for those of you who are working on wetland, we have a wetland restoration activities now in Moldova and in Armenia, and I think the hectare that we are working on is quite huge. And the question was, okay, if you have wetland there, there is a community next to your restoration area. And the community was telling us that, well, you are bringing diseases next to our area. Just mosquito is going to be next to my door. That's what the community was telling. And they were right, by the way. If you don't manage it, yes, you are bringing disease next to their door. But the point is, how am I going to do that restoration activity, so wetland restoration? First, I'm not creating a new wetland area. I'm just restoring the degraded area. So naturally, there is a wetland there. So the people comes to that area, not the wetland didn't come to your area. You came to that area. So I think that has to be well designed, well researched. And when you restore, make sure what kind of biodiversity you are going to have. Which one attracts, by the way, mosquito? Every mosquito, biodiversity doesn't, or wetland doesn't attract mosquito. So that proper design is very, very important. So financial risk, biodiversity, ecosystem risk, and also the biodiversity risk, especially relating to diseases, are the risks that we are already facing it, and the community is telling us, and the government is really highly concerned about those kind of restoration activities. But I think it's up to us to articulate it more properly.
Thank you. And I would like to make a point here. Target 2 itself and many national targets is phrased as a percentage of the area. It doesn't say which areas should be prioritized. So we should be cautious that when we make when countries make a restoration target, we should focus to avoid just focusing at the number. But we should also give importance to which areas should be prioritized, because if it could happen that countries will want to increase the percentage to achieve the numeric target, while forgetting some ecosystems will be easier to restore than others. For example, terrestrial ecosystems, there are more research about it. It's relatively easier to implement compared to, let's say, marine ecosystems. And we should never forget, when we make the 30% global target, or when we make the national target, we should focus on different ecosystems and to prioritize the ones that are with a high importance, biodiversity importance, because some ecosystems, some species, if we lose them forever.
Thank you so much. And I'll because many risks have been talked about, I'll mention the one which is with stakeholder engagement and conflict. I think the tendency as ecologists is to think that we just need to restore a space, but spaces are not inviolate. There are people who live around them that we need to engage with, and all of them have different priorities. And I think that's where I feel the largest risks of sustainability of a restoration project and how it can be upscaled, because you would have different people, different dynamics, different groups, and essentially how do you work with them? How do you make it participatory? How do you engage and get their buy-in? But also how do you scale up and continue that engagement is something that would be great to kind of then work with different disciplines. And I think we talked about transdisciplinary projects, which have shown great success. And I think we've spoken about it in other SERE kind of events as well, that we need to bring in the social scientists, we need to bring in the behavioral change kind of experts and talk about the nudge dynamics and things like that, because there's a lot of things that have evolved in the social sciences. We don't need to really learn from scratch and become experts ourselves. We just need to partner up with people who are already experts in that field and just figure out how we can bring them into our project and learn from them. And very few people have actually kind of managed to do that successfully. And the other one I was kind of going to shout out was data sharing. I think projects kind of live on and then end, and then you have websites, and then the data kind of gets lost. How do we keep that on, and how do we kind of create that knowledge and database? And I think that's where SER kind of can become a bit of a hub, and you kind of have a lot of it happening already, but how do we work across other member organizations and continue to build this up and build the networks? I think is going to be quite key. And essentially just making sure that it's not just a short-term funding thing that Visaya mentioned, like restoration is a long-term effort. Most projects at the most would be 4 to 5 year funding. So how do you go from that project phase into a program, a portfolio project, to a landscape restoration kind of approach? And I feel like these are the major risks that we've seen in the projects that we've been involved in. And probably SER is in a great place to actually try and address a lot of it. And you've done a lot of it already with the standards and the principles. I think we'll kind of close there because we don't want to stand between you and lunch. But thank you so much for your patience. Thank you so much to all our panelists, to Giacomo. And we hope this was an engaging session. We wanted to kind of have this session that talked about the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, the GBF Target 2, the global international commitments, and then what it means for Europe in terms of EU nature restoration law, in terms of other directives that EU has on restoration, and then what would it mean for the countries, the member states, and right down to the site level. So I think that translation of site level to national, to subnational, to regional, to global is something that we often miss the linkages for, and SERE seemed like the best opportunity to do that. So thank you so much, everyone, and thank you to the panelists. And all of us will be here throughout the SERE conference, so feel free to catch any of us at any time if you want to hear more about the projects that were mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you.